As you go through the day, do you ever experience anger, sadness, anxiety? Do you ever feel overwhelmed? It's like you deal with one negative emotion and another pops up. Then you deal with that and another pops up until you're just stressed out and you don't even know why. Well, it's kind of a good news, bad news situation. The bad news is this is just the human condition. It's been this way for as long as humans have walked the planet. So much so that 2,600 years ago, when the historical Buddha walked through the earth, he dealt with the same issues. The good news is that Buddhists have developed a number of tools to help us deal with these emotions, and we've been able to determine the mechanisms from which they come. So I'm going to describe those tools for you today, but first we need to understand how the machine works so that we can learn how to handle the controls. So imagine this. We have our sense organs, that's our eyes that we use to see, our hands that we use to touch, our tongue that we use to taste, etc. And these sense organs make contact with sense objects outside of our physical body. The sense organ making contact with the sense object creates a sense consciousness, and that consciousness evokes an emotional response. The emotional response becomes a thought, and the thought becomes an action. Now that sounds very esoteric and strange, but it'll make more sense once I give you this example. My sense organs, my eyes, make contact with an object out there on the table. Let's say it's a cake. This contact evokes a sense consciousness, and thus a emotion erupts, joy. That joy becomes a thought, I love cake, and that thought becomes an action. I walk over to the table and I cut out a piece of cake. This cycle of our sense organs making contact with sense objects, those sense objects eliciting emotions and thoughts and actions is happening over and over and over again every day, whether we realize it or not. Here's another example. We're driving in the car, listening to the news. This time our ears make contact with a sense object. This is the news coming from the radio. We hear some news, which creates a sense consciousness. The news is bad, so we have an emotion, anger. That anger creates a thought, everything sucks. Now, that's the Buddhist understanding of what's happening to us, but scientists have studied this quite a bit as well, and I'm not a brain scientist, so give me a little bit of room here. However, it's my understanding that the two parts of our brain involved are the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex. The amygdala is the animal part of our brain, so to speak. That's where the fight or flight response comes from. It's also where our initial emotional reactions can be found. The prefrontal cortex, which is located towards the front of our brain, is where all of the thinking happens. Now, what scientists have found is that the amygdala is activated before the prefrontal cortex. So the same as what the Buddha discovered 2,600 years ago, we have an emotional response before we have a thought. Now, what's happening to all of us right now is that we are so overstimulated via our phones and our tablets and our radios, billboards. People have TVs in every room nowadays. And because we have so much sensory input, our amygdalas, frankly, are overloaded. We have more and more emotional responses, and our prefrontal cortex can't keep up. If you've ever heard the saying, I was so angry I couldn't think, that's why. The fight or flight portion of the brain was so activated that the prefrontal cortex couldn't get a word in. So what we need to do if we want to stop this cycle from happening, stop ourselves from being so stressed, reclaim our emotional freedom, is we have to learn to bypass the amygdala, go directly to the prefrontal cortex, and pull some energy out of our emotional responses. Not because emotions are bad, obviously they're not, but because sometimes our emotions do not serve us. So, how do we do this? Well, I have 3 words for you. I don't care. Now, what I personally like to do is whenever I start to feel an emotion arise in my body, I immediately say the words, I don't care. Win the lottery, I don't care. House is on fire, I don't care. I can't find my keys, I don't care. And what that does is it creates a space. It causes me to pause. Because now I'm bypassing the amygdala, I'm using my words, not my feelings. I'm going straight to the prefrontal cortex. And I have to think for a moment. Okay, I said I don't care. Should I? And one of 2 things I find happens. Either one, it turns out, well, I was having a very strong emotional response, but it turns out this actually isn't important, or it's not something I have any control over. So I stick with that response. I don't care. And I go on with my day. But I do so without dealing with the anger and the stress and the strong emotional feelings that I had initially. The other option is that I think about it for a moment, and actually, I do care. I can't find my keys. I actually care quite a bit. I need those to get where I'm trying to go. So then I take the appropriate action to find my keys. I retrace my steps. I ask a family member or a friend if they saw them. But again, because I took the moment to say I don't care, I gave myself that space, robbed the emotion out of the action, I'm able to think more clearly, go about my day more calmly. So that's the first step. Just say I don't care and see what happens. The other thing we can do is a Buddhist technique known as mindful breathing. Now, what we do when we breathe mindfully is we give our brains something else to focus on. Remember, we have the contact via the sense organ, then we have the emotional response, the thought, finally the action. So the goal here is to focus on something other than the object that is eliciting the emotional response, in this case, the breath. And it's very simple. Straighten the back, close the mouth, breathe in and out through the nose. The reason that's important is breathing in through the mouth engages the sympathetic portion of our nervous system that excites us. That's why we breathe in and out of our mouth when we do exercise. Breathing in and out through the nose, however, engages the parasympathetic portion of our nervous system. It calms us down. So we breathe in and out through the nose, focusing on the feeling of the air moving in and out of our lungs. If we want to get fancy, we can also focus in on the feeling of our stomach. Push it out on the inhale, let it relax on the exhale. Push out the belly button on the inhale, relax it on the exhale. Doing all of that, breathing through the nose, focusing on the breath, pushing out the belly button on the inhale, Again, gives our mind something else to focus on other than the object that's creating the emotional response. Once our nervous system has come back to homeostasis, once our prefrontal cortex has been engaged again, bypassing the amygdala, now we can think more clearly. Now, one thing we can do if we really want to get fancy, let's say there's something that's just really upsetting to us. It's really stressful. We're talking to a friend or a family member, they're saying hurtful things to us. We care. Not because what they're saying is true, just because this is a person that's important to us and we don't like how they're treating us. Or maybe it's not that. Maybe we just lost our job. Again, it's a situation where we need to care, but it's not maybe something we can do something about right this instant. How do we bring ourselves back to homeostasis? Well, we combine these two techniques. So what I like to do is I do the mindful breathing in through the nose, extending the belly button on the inhale, relaxing the stomach on the exhale, focusing on the breath. On every exhale, I say in my mind, I don't care. Breathe in, breathe out, I don't care. Breathe in, breathe out, I don't care. And what this does is it engages the prefrontal cortex in multiple ways. So we have a very strong emotion. We need to put a lot of focus on the prefrontal cortex to bring our nervous system back under control. It's a very simple process, so if we need to do it for 30 seconds, a minute, 20 minutes, whatever it takes, we just wash, rinse, and repeat until we feel like we're ourselves again. And then we allow ourselves to take action. When we do this, when we understand the way that our perception works, then we're able to take control of how we respond to our environment. We're able to find emotional freedom. By responding by saying, I don't care, and by engaging in mindful breathing. Amitabha.